Okay. I love that music because I'm kind of lugging along on this Monday morning. That gets me fired up. So everybody doing okay today?
Yes, doing good. How are you?
Good, good. My name is Carlson. I don't know some of you guys on this call, and I expect probably more people will jump on. I'm the managing broker for the Keller Williams in-town office. So I am happy to be here, but I'm more happy that you guys are here. Because honestly, just to be here furthers your knowledge. It shows that you want to further your knowledge in the area of broker issues, and it's just going to make you a better agent all around. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys being here. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I thought what we do, we try to pick different topics. We do this twice a month, and we try to mix up the content a little bit. And so today the topic is how much do you know? And what I've done is taken some scenarios. I think I've got 10 or 11 scenarios, and this is meant to be interactive. It's meant to encourage discussion. It's meant to kind of make you think a little bit. So we'll go through sort of each one, and I may call on you. There are absolutely no wrong answers. It's just meant to kind of make you think. And I'll talk about, sort of what the outcome was on some of these. It may take 30 minutes. It may take the full hour. It depends on how many questions you guys have and how much interaction and all that good stuff. But thought we would try this format. And at the end, if you all have just any other kind of random questions related to broker issues, contracts, compliance, all that good stuff, you're welcome to ask me at the end. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So let's get started with the first one. I'm giving you kind of what I think is sort of an easy one, but we're going to talk through this. I'm going to share my screen now. Niale, I think I need saying I can't share with the other part while the other participant is sharing.
There you go.
All right, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, all right. Are you guys ready? How much do you know? Okay, so I want to, the first scenario, this happens quite a bit. Okay, what is wrong with this signature? Okay, this is talking about the signature on the actual purchase and sale agreement. Who wants to answer? Raise your hand. You can raise your hand on the Zoom if you need to. All right, Selena?
Yeah, I accidentally clapped. Oops.
Anyway, I didn't even notice. Take a clap.
I haven't encountered this a lot, but I've encountered it once, and I asked the question. My understanding is that they're actually supposed to sign as the LLC or something like that. Like they don't sign just their name. And I think then there's associated paperwork that goes with the contract to show that they're an LLC.
Yep. Anybody else? Has anybody else encountered this on the call? Okay, so basically, when you see something like this, John Smith, and then you see JS Homes LLC, so that should signal to you that it's an LLC that is purchasing. They want to do it in the name of the LLC. So when that happens, that basically the entity itself cannot be the signer. That's what you need to remember. So you need to say something like John Smith, authorized member of JS Homes LLC. And the reason is because if you don't do that, if somebody's trying to get out of the contract or whatever, that contract could be deemed unenforceable. It's the same thing for trusts. You need to say as signing as a trustee. Anytime you're signing as an entity, you need an actual person's name signing on behalf of that entity. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it makes sense. I always remember it as an entity because if anything goes wrong with the property and, you know, somebody's trying to go after you, they need a physical person to talk to.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And back to your point, Selena, the closing attorney is going to require some documentation that basically shows that they're authorized to sign on behalf of that LLC. Okay.
So again, it's supposed to be John Smith, and then he's supposed to.
John
continue to say,
Smith, yep, authorized
Authorized.
member of JS Homes LLC.
Okay, so that's a pretty long signature. but
Also,
it's-
if like this had said, like this under the signature not line, John Smith, or if it had said JS Homes LLC, that is definitely incorrect because you need a person signing on behalf of that.
Okay.
Can anybody think, same with incorporations? Okay. Anybody think of any other entities? We talked about trusts.
I just had one the other day where it was power of attorney, don't they?
Power of attorney. Signing on behalf, yep, of a seller. We've got another question related to power of attorneys here. So that's another good example. So just know that if it's an LLC, a company or something like that, that the person needs to sign on behalf of the entity. Hey, Tom.
Hey there, sorry I'm late. I had
That's
a
okay. Chime
emergency
in.
request.
What I've done, Tom, is just kind of put some real life, mostly real life scenarios. There are a couple that aren't. And we're just sort of going to engage in some conversation around these.
Okay,
We're just
I
kind of.
do have, I don't know if this has been discussed yet or not, but you all do realize, and I see this all the time, it makes me crazy. When a closing attorney is holding earnest money, you have to get the agreement signed and and the closing attorney acting as holder. There are two forms. And we had a situation once where they had not signed the agreement, but they had, but they were holding, and the other document had been executed that they were acting. But because of that, because they had not signed the agreement, they refused to disperse the earnest money to the correct party because they said they never agreed to hold it. So you guys need to be aware of that. And that's why both those forms need to be signed by the closing attorney if they're going to hold your earnest money. Or you may have a situation where, like this, where they say, well, we didn't agree to hold it, so we're just going to release it back to the buyer, and the seller lost out on that.
That's a great point. Does everybody understand that? And on the purchase, the GAR purchase and sale agreement, you know, it clearly says, it is in small print, but it says when the closing attorney is acting as holder, F510 and F511 is required.
Yeah, it's right there on the form.
So, yep. Yeah, that's real important. You need agreement on who the holder is. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. I don't remember what it is, but aha, that your power of attorney question. Keller Williams Heart of Atlanta Group does not allow our agents to act as power of attorney for our clients. First of all, is there anybody that doesn't understand what power of attorney is? It's no shame in not knowing. I'd much rather you ask, and I can cover it quickly. Just raise your hand. Okay, so everybody knows what power of attorney is. Okay, why would you think that it's not, we don't allow this?
Well, it would be a major conflict of interest. And I actually thought that GREC doesn't allow it. In my real estate class, they told us just don't even do it. Don't even think about it. Because obviously we have an interest in seeing the deal through. So we're going to be more inclined to sign off or overlook something if we're signing on behalf of our client.
I couldn't have answered that better myself. That is an excellent answer. There is one other reason as well that kind of goes into that. Can anybody think what that other reason may be? This one's a little bit more advanced. So conflict of interest, number one. Does everybody know what E&O insurance is? Do you think our E&O insurance is going to cover us if we're acting as power of attorney for one of our clients? They will not. Okay, so we would not be covered.
Carlson, I use the phrase not an arm's length transaction, which is basically the same thing as conflict of interest.
Yep. Yep. So just know, because I get these questions, and Tom, you probably do too. I probably get one every month or so with an agent, and I actually have had agents just go ahead and do it. And that's a big no-no. So they'll come into my office and say, hey, can I be power of attorney? My client is out of state. They don't know anybody and they're in a jam and we're closing next week. And can I do this? The answer is going to be no. They're going to have to find somebody else on their behalf to do that. Any questions? All right. Go to the next one. Okay. This is actually something that happened. Let me read it to you, okay? An experienced agent, and this is a very experienced agent in our office, had a buyer that was under contract on basically a renovated house. They renovated it. It was a rehab home. They had the inspection done, and the inspection revealed some electrical concerns. Specifically, a few wires weren't capped in the crawl space. It revealed a bunch of other stuff too. As time went on, the buyers lost confidence in the builder's ability to complete the repairs in the manner they wanted. So they had another contractor come over and basically advise them that they didn't like the way the repairs were being done, okay? At walkthrough, the buyer discovered all the repairs had been completed except for the capped wires. Our agent, the buyer's agent, sent over a unilateral right to terminate due to the wires not being capped. Okay, does anybody have any comments on this? Is that the right thing to do by the buyer's agent? So all the other repairs have been completed, but the capped wires had not.
I mean, if the seller is in breach of contract, it allows to terminate. If it was a special stipulation that they should cap those wires.
Okay, I do think the seller had an obligation, but if a buyer's agent just sends over a unilateral right to terminate without giving that seller any kind of notice that something hasn't been done, is that correct?
No, I think you should address it before.
That's right. Do you think that capping wires is a quote material repair?
No.
So if that were to go to court, let's say that the seller, it became this debacle and it ended up sitting in front of a judge, what do you think a judge is going to say? That the buyer tried to terminate over 2 wires not being capped.
Yeah, I think he would rule in the favor of the seller. I mean, this looks to me like somebody trying to find a reason to back out of the deal because they changed their mind.
That's absolutely what happened. They were trying to lawfully terminate the contract, and that's really not a lawful reason, nor did they do it properly. So let's say that the repair had been material. Let's say that the sewer line wasn't replaced. Okay, and it was supposed to be replaced. That's a material repair. That's thousands of dollars to do that, right? Does anybody know what the process would be for the buyer to basically let the seller know that they're in default? it's kind of important to know how to go about this. First thing I would say, if you get to that point, you probably might want to call your broker just to make sure they're looking at the contract. And you know, you don't want to terminate without doing it in the proper way, right, Tom?
Yes, that's right. We just had an incident on Friday, very similar to this, except it was, the repairs were, you know, pretty significant and the house had been vandalized. And so I don't know if I'm going to answer your question.
That's okay.
What I had our agent do is send over notice of the deficiencies that were discovered and put the seller on notice that these need to be corrected prior to our closing on Monday, knowing that they probably weren't going to do them, but that was the proper way to handle it, is to give that other party notice of, I wouldn't call it default because they aren't in default yet, but notice of items that need to be corrected prior to closing.
Yep. So everybody got that? You need to send notice first and, you know, give the seller a quote reasonable amount of time, depending on what it is and what's reasonable and what's occurred, to correct it. And if they don't, then you may have the right to send over unilateral right to terminate. By the way, once you send over that unilateral right to terminate with your, let's say in this example, your buyer's signature, that contract's terminated.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions on, just general questions on terminations? Has anybody here actually had to do one?
I just would also say that until that closing day comes and goes, do not unilaterally terminate that contract, because they have every right to, as a seller, they have every right to respond and make those repairs. And as a buyer, you could even show up with a suitcase full of cash. It's the example that I use a lot, you know. So do not terminate until that closing date comes and goes.
Right. I actually had a call this morning, and it's new construction, and the closing date is mid-November, and the builder has not broken ground yet. So, you know, the question to me is, can my buyers terminate and get their earnest money back and the builder deposit and all that good stuff? First of all, what I'm going to say is, have you read the contract, right? But when I was looking at it, there's the default of the seller. The seller wouldn't default. They have the option to extend 90 days past that closing date. So technically, they would have to wait until the closing date and give that seller another 90 days to try to get the home complete before the seller is truly in default. So the buyer would not really, they would not have the right to terminate prior to that. Does that make sense to everybody? We're a quiet group today. We need some more music. Okay, hold on. All right, let's go to the next one real quick. Okay, this is a real life scenario too that happened. An agent in our office has a buyer purchasing a home with no due diligence period, right? We're seeing, at least in the past, I'm starting to see the due diligence periods maybe going up a little bit. So instead of like 2 or 3 days, maybe they're 5 or 7 days, which is a good thing for buyers. But in this instance, there was zero due diligence. The seller's property disclosure, the buyer received that from the seller, and it stated that the sellers had a report from a structural engineer when they purchased the home, and it was available upon request. Okay, so the seller had noticed some concern. They were concerned with, obviously, when they purchased it, had a structural engineer look at it, write a letter. They provided that letter to the buyer. A couple weeks later, the buyers had a structural company assess that same issue. The contractor said there were significant issues well beyond what had been disclosed, including evidence of settling in the upstairs. The buyer then sent a termination to the seller. Who do you think received the earnest money on this? David Swift, do you have any ideas?
No, ma'am. I am brand new and I'm
Okay, that's all
and
right.
listening to you and trying to gain some information from y'all.
Good. Well, that's no problem at all. Somebody has to have an idea on this, right?
Is it the seller?
Why do you think so?
Because no due diligence period.
It was really the seller, right? Because the buyer, it's a buyer beware state, right? And they waived their due diligence period. The thing that gets a little bit tricky is that these sellers disclosures, a lot of buyers in this type of market are trying to point back to the disclosure saying that the seller didn't disclose something properly. And in this instance, the seller provided everything they had. There's no evidence or there's no proof that the seller had any other knowledge above what they had been given in that structural report. So you would have to basically, the buyer would basically have to have some sort of evidence that the seller knowingly withheld information related to the structure in order, I think, to have any kind of case that they would be due the earnest money back. There's a lot of, I don't know about you, Tom, but a lot of disclosure issues, property disclosure issues that I see.
Yeah, I mean, the property disclosure is to the best of their knowledge, and that would be, you basically would have to prove fraud. That's a very, very difficult thing to prove, especially in a buyer beware state.
Yeah, and I would, with you guys out there, I do think the market's gonna hopefully balance out just a little bit more so that buyers are having time to have inspections done. But I'd really, really, really be careful with no due diligence period and no right to request repairs period. I would advise against that personally. If you don't know what you're getting. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. This is another disclosure one. This happens probably once a month, I would say. And this is a real life example. One of our buyers purchased a condo. 4 days after closing, the neighbor below knocked on her door and mentioned a leak in the ceiling underneath the bathroom. Upon further discussion, the neighbor let the new owner know that he had notified the previous seller a few months ago about the leak. The buyer called the KW broker, in this instance me. What are some things I might have said? Or I might have asked?
I would have asked if they had put it in writing, perhaps.
So was it on the seller's property disclosure?
Oh, that's true too.
Was there any leak that was pointed out? In this case, there was not. They didn't disclose any kind of problem on the seller's property disclosure.
However, wouldn't they have had to notify the seller in writing theoretically? Otherwise, it's his word against the seller wasn't living there, then it's still their word against.
Right. It's, the next part of this is what did I advise? And unfortunately, after something closes, there's no way for us to hold a previous seller's feet to the fire, or for their agent to hold a seller's feet to the fire on something. And so, we're not attorneys. We're not trained as attorneys. We're not supposed to give legal advice. The next correct answer would be, listen, let me get you, if you're really concerned about this, let me get you a few attorneys you could talk to and get their opinion. And I'm happy to provide you with whatever documentation you need. I can get you the contract, I can get you seller's property disclosure, whatever you need. I can help in that regard, but I just don't, we can't advise on legal matters.
And Carlson, I'll piggyback on what you just said. Always great to put everything in writing. For example, if you've got a tree in the neighbor's yard and they've got a big tree and the tree limbs hanging over your roof, if that tree limb breaks and falls on your roof, you as the homeowner are responsible. However, if you have documentation where you've notified the neighbor that the tree limb is encroaching on your roof, and if it breaks, they're going to have to be responsible, then guess what? Their insurance company would have to pay. And I found that out the hard way years ago when I bought a new house that had a tree right next to the house, and the tree died, and I had to spend like $3,500 for having it removed. But it's important to know that everything should be in writing, and you should keep all that documentation.
Yep.
You might have had a case against the seller if there was some documentation to support that they had been notified.
Yep, absolutely.
I have a very similar situation. One of my clients, they bought some years ago, and they shared with me, they received a letter from the neighbor where the neighbor is concerned that the tree gonna fall on their property because there's a lot of water coming out of that corner of where the tree is standing, and they say like, yeah, it's like the roots can get washed out and then it falls. So that's exactly the same thing. If my clients don't act on it, then they are responsible in case the tree falls on the neighbor's land, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they did the right thing by putting it, did they put it in writing?
Yes, they sent them a letter with a certified mail.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an awkward thing to do that with your neighbor, but it's really important. Otherwise, you could be liable for it.
And would you, if you if the tree is on your land, would you, they have scheduled an arborist to come and look at it. Now, if that arborist says it needs to be cut, they have to pay it out of pocket, or should they just wait until it really falls and then have the insurance cover it?
The tree is on their property?
Yes.
If it were me and an arborist came and said that the tree was diseased, I would probably go ahead and take it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that tree falls the wrong way on a neighbor's house or something and it damages it and it was diseased and you knew about it, I think your people might have some liability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't look diseased, but the drainage system of the whole house kind of ends in that corner. So there's a lot of water that floats on the neighbor's land.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But you said if it falls and they didn't cut it, then they still have insurance that will cover that, right? As a homeowner.
I think the best answer is they need to check with their insurance agent, I think. I don't know if a tree falls, if your insurance is going to cover that. You're saying basically it falls and it doesn't damage anything?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't know that the insurance is going to hire somebody to cut up a tree and haul it away.
Oh, no, I think if it falls, it will fall on the neighbor house.
Yeah, I would just, if all of a sudden, like you now have record that tree is diseased.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they have liability. If you don't have, if you think it's a perfectly healthy tree and it's just a act of nature,
Mm-hmm.
like that, yes, your insurance will cover that.
Okay, got it. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Okay, this is a special stipulation, real life again, that caused us some problems. And I'm gonna throw it up here and just see if you guys have any kind of, can tell me why it might have caused some problems. All parties agree that the buyer will now be contracting a structural engineer to inspect the property and provide an engineer's letter to confirm it is structurally sound. Anybody got any idea why that might provide a problem?
I mean, if you hire an engineer and the engineer finds issues with the structure, how can they provide a letter to confirm it's structurally sound? It doesn't make sense.
Right, what happens if it's not structurally sound?
Right.
In this special stipulation, what happens if it's not structurally sound?
Yeah, it doesn't state it. It's like they want them to prove something where you don't know if it can be proved even.
Does it say who's paying for the structural engineer?
No.
As buyer will be contracting, so I guess technically the buyer is paying, but there was some issue around that as well. But it's a really poorly written stip. So, you know, you want to know what's going to happen. What's the consequence, right? If in this case, if the engineer's letter confirms it isn't structurally sound, then the buyer has the right to terminate the contract at no penalty to buyer, right? That would be the appropriate thing. The other thing we ran into was, and by the way, this was our seller, and the buyer was looking for a way to get out of the contract. That's what this boiled down to. And they just hired an engineer that would write them a letter to basically say that the house was not structurally sound. So, you know, our client is like, well, did they really hire a structural engineer? And, you know, when you're looking at the actual licensure, no, it technically was not a structural engineer. So then it became a dispute over the earnest money, which the closing attorney was holding, and basically encouraged the parties to work it out between themselves. And at the end of the day, the house went under contract immediately. And I think the seller just ended up saying, forget it, because the buyer was like, I'm going to take you to court over this. So, but you can see how vague stipulations get us in trouble. It's much better to be clear so that all parties understand what the intent is. So a lot of times there are vague stipulations, and we want to be as clear as we can. Anything you want to add to that, Tom?
No, I think that everybody just needs to understand, and I see it every day. You've got to have a consequence in your special stipulation. Who's going to do it? What are they going to do? And what happens if they don't do it? Those are the three things that you need to think about when you're writing a special stipulation. And again, if you need help or need to run something by your broker, please do so.
That's right. I always ask agents to kind of take a stab at it first. And then we are happy to review it, make sure we're covering all our bases if you need us to, for sure. So, all right. Okay, this is kind of a good one. A house, this is not a live example, by the way, but I wanted to put it in here because this has happened, and I'm sure Tom has some real life examples. But in this example, a house sits on a lot in a subdivision and someone buys the property. At closing, an owner's title policy is purchased without the benefit of a current survey. It is later determined that the house actually sits on the adjacent lot. So here's the question. Would the owner be able to submit a claim under their owner's title policy? Why or why not? Rondalyn. You there? She's not there. So basically, should we be recommending to our buyers to get surveys?
Yes,
We need a resounding yes on this.
yes, it is more important, in my humble opinion, than a home inspection,
And why is that, Tom?
because you're purchasing the land that improvement sits on. And if you don't know what the land is that you're purchasing, then that doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, it's another form of an inspection that we need our buyers, you need to make sure you are recommending that your buyers have. It's, $600. The thing is, when a survey reveals a problem, it's usually a pretty substantial problem. A survey is the boundaries, right, of the actual property. So it's going to show things like easements, encroachments, is it a shared driveway? I've seen it where sewer lines have abandoned sewer lines have gone under the house. I've seen where air conditioning units sit on a neighboring property. Usually those issues are pretty big. And the problem is, if you have a buyer that does not get a survey, okay, and they have their owner's title insurance policy, and later, 5 years down the road, they go to sell the house, the new buyers do a survey and it reveals something that if the original person had gotten a survey but didn't, their owner's title policy is not going to protect them in that instance. So it's basically would be an exception to their owner's title policy. So the homeowner would not have a valid claim under the policy because of the survey exception. Do you understand that? So it's real important to know that and make sure you're explaining that to your buyers. Because surveys are optional. A lot of states, they are not optional. A lot of states, they are required, but in Georgia, they're optional because the lender is protected, but the homeowner may not be.
I have a question about just the timing. In this market, it seems like the survey is taking longer than it takes to close on the house. So if it's not completed, and most of my clients are either in townhomes or just choosing not to get one. So, or like condos and stuff. But so then if the survey is not going to be available to after closing, is it still valid? Or not?
After closing does not help you. It needs to be done before closing. And the survey, if the survey reveals something that causes a problem with the title of the house, so that the seller's not able to provide good and marketable title. So if an air conditioning unit crosses the boundary, if there's an old sewer line that runs under the house, that's going to cloud the title and your buyer is going to be protected all the way up until closing for something like that. It's good if you can get a survey done during a due diligence period. I know this market is tough. And really, I'm talking about single family homes.
Right.
But because there are things that a survey might reveal that wouldn't necessarily cause a problem with the title. Like, for example, fence encroachments. Maybe a neighboring fence is, 12 inches, or maybe your fence is 12 inches on a neighbor's property. Things like that, which happen all the time. But really, it's the big things that you want to be concerned about. And their houses are so close together in town Atlanta, and there's so many shared driveways, and even outside, you just never know. And it's a small price to pay for the protection it offers, in my opinion.
So what suggestions do you have for getting it done in a timely manner in this market where people are wanting 21-day closings on both sides? Well, I purchased a house in the fall and it took like 6 weeks to get my survey. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I mean, I think, have you checked with lots of different survey companies?
No, and so I see somebody else is actually asking the same question, so maybe
Yeah.
answer theirs.
Yeah, I would definitely search. Sometimes the closing attorney has more pull with the surveyors, so they might be able to get it quicker. The thing I'd be most concerned about is getting it back prior to closing.
It's a problem. We recognize that. I don't really have a solution. All I can tell you is that this market's not going to stay this way forever. And my opinion is that we should be advising our clients to get a survey.
And at a minimum too, like if, and ultimately it's your buyer's decision, right? But if the other thing I would encourage you to do is ask if the seller has an existing one. Even put it as a stipulation in the contract for them to provide it if they have one in their possession within a certain number of hours from binding agreement date. At least you see something, right? And then you can see when it was done and how recently and stuff. I always send surveys to the closing attorney once it's done, just to have them look over it and make sure I'm not a survey expert. Sometimes I'm like, I don't exactly know what this means. Hey, closing attorney, can you look at it? And they're happy to do that on your client's behalf. Any other questions on surveys? It is a problem, right? And so are appraisals, by the way. Appraisals are taking some time too.
I think we have a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat here. Okay. Let's see. See my question. What if buyer orders a survey after due diligence period has ended, but prior to closing? Seller has survey that buyer has seen and was made a part of the contract. You can still order a survey after the due diligence period and get it back prior to closing. If that survey reveals something that's a problem with the title, you're still protected. Did that answer that question, Leanne? Okay, cool. And the seller has survey that buyer has seen and was made part of the contract. Yeah. I would take that survey that they've seen too and send it over to the closing attorney just to have them look at it, see if they have any concerns with it. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm not monitoring this chat. Somebody had another question. Okay, let's go to the next one here. Tom, would you mind monitoring the chat for me?
You got it.
Thank you. All right, next question. All right, this is a good one. This is a real life one. Okay, a buyer is purchasing a house. The square footage in FMLS says 4,200. The tax records also reflect the same square footage. So you got 4,200, 4,200. The buyer receives the appraisal back and the square footage shows 3,500 and the home does not appraise for the contract price. Does the buyer have a claim against the seller for inaccurately stating square footage? I need my Jeopardy music. It's only yes or no. Who wants to guess? Anybody? Selena?
I would send that to the attorney.
You send it to the attorney?
Yeah, I would let the attorney handle that.
Anybody else have a guess?
Well, if the tax records say that, I mean, I've never seen them always be consistent. Sometimes there are big discrepancies. I would wonder how an appraiser got such different results, but it's not uncommon. And if they had an appraisal contingency, then they have an opportunity to dispute that portion of it. I mean,
Yep.
they should see with their own eyes what is, like, it's like, if a whole 700 square feet is missing, like, you should kind of know that if you've inspected the home yourself.
Right.
So to me, it's just the appraisal contingency, like, okay, it doesn't appraise. That's really the issue now, to me. I don't know if they have so my answer is, I don't think they have a claim for inaccurately stating, especially if it came from the tax records.
And that is the correct answer. Are the tax records, like when we're working with buyers and the square footage is in the tax records, one of the things I always let our buyers know is that do not rely on the tax records for square footage. I would say more than 60% of the time they're incorrect. If anybody's ever done any sort of addition, it may just not have been updated correctly. You just never know. It's kind of a, I mean, hopefully the percentage is higher than that, but you just can't rely on it. And then in terms of FMLS, has anybody ever noticed that little bitty microscopic verbiage down at the bottom of every single listing you pull in FMLS? This is what it says. Accuracy of all information deemed reliable, but not guaranteed and should be independently verified. Okay, so you're right. That's an excellent point, because hopefully, you're within your appraisal contingency and the buyer is able to get out based on that, because the home did not appraise. But the buyer would not really have a claim against the seller for that.
I'll just add, I purchased a personal home a few years ago, and it was a split level. It said 3,000 square foot per the tax records. When we looked at it, we were like, gosh, this doesn't seem like 3,000, but we bought it anyway because we wanted it. But I did make sure that then when I went and listed it and sold it, that I used the appraised value, because it was off by about 800 square feet. So,
And sometimes, honestly, appraisers value like split levels and daylight basements. Sometimes that can throw off square footage, because appraisers might value it differently because they treat a basement different than above ground square footage. So when you have a daylight basement, like I've had one before where half of the basement has windows looking outside, the other half is underground. And so the appraiser valued the whole thing as a basement, and it really impacted the square footage. So sometimes things like that happen as well, which is why it can throw it off. But I mean, if you're working with a seller, it's always a good question to say, hey, do you have the appraisal from when you bought it? And then the square footage should be in that appraisal from when they purchased. And so that's usually the one I would try to use in MLS. But it's up to the buyer to verify all the information is correct.
Hey, Carlson,
Yes.
I had a situation, a similar situation to this, except the property appraised, and the buyer was furious because the square footage that they thought they were getting wasn't actually there, but that property appraised. And so that was a little bit of a challenge.
What happened?
They bought the house and moved on.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have had an out, really.
I mean, it wasn't really anything about they didn't have an out, but there wasn't anything really about the house they didn't like, other than the fact that it was advertised, with more square footage than it actually was. So, I mean, they loved the house, so
Right.
They just had to move on because it did appraise.
Yeah. I mean, I think the moral of the story of this one is just when you're working with buyers, just say, look, until you get the appraisal back, you won't know you may not know the actual square footage. This is kind of what they think it is, but until you get it back, you may not know the actual square footage. So just kind of prep them for that. We have something in the chat. Anything in the chat, Tom?
No, we're good.
All right. Okay, so this may take you back to real estate school. All right, what must the holder of the earnest money have in order to disperse the earnest money to either the buyer or the seller?
A signed termination from both parties or a 10 days letter from the attorney.
That's right. You must have, we cannot, as holders or the closing attorney, if we don't have a termination release with both the buyer and the seller signatures in that earnest money section, whether it's mutual or a unilateral right to terminate, we cannot disperse earnest money. So there are times when the buyer and seller don't agree who should receive the earnest money, right? When that happens, that's when we go to that sort of 10-day process. We issue what's called, we, the holder, issue what's called a 10-day letter. And we have to review the contract and make our best interpretation as to where the earnest money should go. And then we're going to notify both the parties in writing, send the letter, basically saying we think the earnest money should go to, let's just say the buyer, back to the buyer. And you have 10 days to dispute it, basically. Give us your side of why you think it should be the other way around. And then if we get something back, any sort of objection, we will review that and then make a final determination. So that's kind of the process. But if we can't get both signatures on that termination from the buyer and seller in that earnest money section, we cannot disperse those funds. I'm probably doing, how many 10-day letters are you doing, Tom? I've probably had 10 this year, I'd say.
I do them more than I want to.
Yeah.
Generally, if there's a real question about the earnest money, then less 10-day letters. I write a lot of 10-day letters because we have sellers that get upset because the buyer is terminating within their due diligence period.
That's such a waste of time.
It is. It really is a waste of time, but I do it more than I care to admit.
Yeah, I have done that some too. Okay.
All right, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
And the question is, the property can be put on the market if it has been terminated, but earnest money hasn't been released yet, correct?
That is correct.
That is correct.
Yep. Termination, is different than, mutually agreeing on the earnest money. The one caveat, if it's the seller terminating, just make sure they have the lawful reason to terminate. Because if they don't, the buyer could, in theory, sue for performance. So you want to make sure it was terminated properly. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'm doing, has anybody done their code of ethics? Because I'm doing mine right now. And by the way, if you need that, you just go to the National Association of Realtors page, and they've got there's a non-CE free one. If you need the CE credits, I think it's like $30 or something like that, but it's online. It's super easy. It's actually really good. I'm actually learning some stuff, so it's cool. But in this example, this from the
Hey, Carlson, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've got to get off the call.
Okay.
I've got an appointment that's here. But thank you to everybody who joined us today. And Carlson, thanks for putting together such a great presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for your input. We really appreciate it. I just got a couple more. So this one, in this example, Realtor Rob lists a house for sale and advertises it is close to a bus stop. Buyer Barb is very interested in the home because it is close to a bus stop. Buyer Barb makes an offer on the house, explaining to Realtor Rob that her physical disability requires a home near a bus line. When Realtor Rob learns a few days later that the bus stop near the home is closing, he informs Buyer Barb. Buyer Barb terminates the contract because of this. Did Realtor Rob do the right thing by informing Buyer the bus line was shutting down. So basically, was he working in his seller's best interest? Did he have the right to inform buyer Barb? That's basically the question. Let's see, we got a yes. That is correct. Why? Per the code of ethics, realtor Rob's efforts to sell his client's home do not relieve him of his obligation to treat buyer Barb honestly. The bus stop was a critical aspect in buyer Barb's decision to purchase the home. I mean, it's almost like the golden rule, right? It's like do unto others, like she's buying it because of the bus stop. I mean, you owe her the obligation to tell her that the bus stop is no longer going to be there. Anybody have any questions on that? Is that common sense, or was that something that you wouldn't know if you had the right to do or not?
Well, not really questioning it, but it doesn't say this, but I would imagine that Realtor Rob really needs to run it by his seller first before just doing it. Maybe not exactly in this case, but in most cases.
And I agree with that. I think it's not run it by, but I think he needs to say, I'm ethically obligated to disclose this to her now that we've been made aware. And this was the reason for her purchasing the home. Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If he didn't advertise that it was near a bus stop, would that be something he would have?
If it wasn't advertised and he wasn't aware that that was the reason that the buyer was purchasing the home, then I would say no, not necessarily. Then that kind of falls on the buyer. Like we don't really know where MARTA bus stops are and things like that necessarily. But in this particular example, he advertised it. He knew that's why the buyer was purchasing there. She had a disability, you know, I mean, it was ethically the right thing to do. We need to treat the other party honestly and fairly. We owe that obligation to our customers. Good question, Joe. Okay, I think. Oh, this is my last one. This is a good one. This is a real life example. And the reason I'll tell you in just a second, but we have a listing agent in our office that has $1 million listing. An agent from another brokerage, I won't say who, asked to show it. Seller and his wife work from home. They also have 3 big dogs. They straightened up the home, get it ready to show, left the house in the blazing 90-degree heat with their 3 dogs, waited an hour for the showing to be complete and drive, you know, they're just driving around. When they get back, they have video cameras in the house and they discovered the agent was the only one there and was doing promo videos for her Instagram account. And the promo videos were about how to stage a home. Look how pretty this house is, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think the best course of the action should be for the listing broker? It's not necessarily that, I guess. It's like the one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, and hopefully everybody knows this by now, but when you're showing buyers houses, I mean, there are so many, I mean, if you have listings, your sellers are calling you, telling exactly what the buyers are saying, right? I mean, they're listening. So I would just advise your buyers, look, we're going to go through the house. We're not going to talk about the house. Until we get out to our car, we're not going to say one thing about this house. So that would be sort of my first thing, because it's real easy when you're showing and buyers get all excited and they're like, oh my gosh, I love this. I love this. You know, do you think there are any offers? You know, I'm willing to pay the list price for it. Like they're saying all these things in the house, and you're just going to have to kind of train them not to do that the sellers could be listening or watching. In this particular example, we contacted the other broker, and it's not the broker's fault. You know, the broker, I'm sure the broker had no knowledge that their agent had done this, but what the broker needs to do is educate that agent on why that's not a good thing to do. Anybody have any questions on anything like this? The biggest thing is just be careful when you're working with buyers, because sellers are listening. Just assume that they're cameras at this point. or videos or Ring doorbells or whatever it is. Alexas. Anybody have any questions? We are at the end of our hour. I hope, is this beneficial to people? I mean, we can keep this format every so often. We can do it again. I just want to make sure that people you like this format or learning something. We can always change it if we need to.
There was a question in the chat. What are the rules around shooting content?
So that's a
It
really,
was helpful, yes.
oh, good. That's a really good question. I think you have to be really careful. If you do not have the seller's permission, you are not allowed to show that on social media. Like I've even been sat in classes where the outside of the house, if you don't have permission to shoot the outside of the house, you're technically not supposed to be doing it. So certainly that is a concern, and I'd be real careful about doing something like that. You know, the reality is, like, if I had a listing and an agent in my office said, hey, I'd love to help market your home. Would you mind if I went over to the house, took some pictures and kind of helped put it on my social media to reach more people? You may be open to doing that with people, and that's totally fine. But the big takeaway is ask for permission to do that kind of stuff. I really appreciate everybody being here. We will see you, I guess, in a couple weeks. And by the way, if you guys ever have anything you'd like us to talk about, feel free to shoot any one of the brokers an email and we will incorporate it into the topics. We just want to make sure everybody's learning and has good takeaways and are getting what they need from this. Cool. Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Go sell some houses.